again to Bright Spot. My name is Fred Smith, Houston Graduate School of Theology, Professor of Public Theology. And we have two wonderful guests with us today that you've met, and I want to let them introduce themselves.
Thank you. Virgil Wood.
Tell me just a little bit more. So just a second, just a little bit more.
All right. No, I'm a co-founder of something called the Jubilee National Collaborative, and I work directly here in an organization we've created called SECO, Saving Every Child on Planet Earth, rich, poor, black, white, everything.
There you go. Thank you.
And I'm on Cardwell, along with Dr. Wood, co-founder of Jubilee National Collaborative. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and I also pastor New Canaan International Church there, and am executive director of Heroes and Dreams Academy.
Okay, very good. Now, I've had, for the last 4 or 5 sessions, I've had detailed conversations with both of you now about who you are, where you come from. Now I want to know what you're doing, what you want to do, and what are you asking, of us as a people and as a nation, to save every child, and leave no child left behind, as Marilyn Knight Ellerton, would say. We finished our last conversation. You were just beginning to tell me about the background, about what it is that you're trying to do, the context and accomplish. But the specific model, one of the things you said success would look like if you had a portable model that you not only use here in Houston, but that you can use around the country. Schumann would call that prototyping.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
We were going to various community meetings called by government agencies and the like, and you've heard the mantra, "Where's the faith community?"
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to engage the faith community.
Yes,
and so we would go to these meetings, and whatever the agency was, they would present what the problem might be, and might even have a breakfast and give handouts to pastors that were there, and then nothing would happen, and I would hear some of the aftermath of that. We did all of this. Why weren't pastors getting? So I happened to be in a meeting in the Attorney General's office in Virginia, and they were raising that question, and I said, well, it seems to me that there are two issues that you're facing. Number one, most pastors, even those who are trained, are not trained in community engagement. If they're seminary trained, they might have some training in evangelism, but that does not in any way equate with what's needed for community engagement. And so why don't you train for what you want? I said the second thing is this. You invite pastors, you give them these packets, they go home, and they don't know what to do with them because you haven't really made an ask. So how can we foster some process where we can match a church's DNA with what you're asking, with the problem that you're asking to be addressed? And out of those conversations came another conversation with the dean of the School of Education, Counseling, and Leadership at the University of Lynchburg, and we collaborated in putting together something called the Faith-Based Leadership Institute for Community Engagement. That became the backbone of the creation of a model that essentially is seeking to train pastors or a pastor's designee to begin to understand how their church can engage themselves in the community and how they can match the church's DNA with that engagement so that they are being faithful to the ministry that they are called to.
So what does that look like?
Well, churches differ in their gifts, so to speak, their willingness, readiness, their resources. So that if you had, let's say 40 churches. We're going to start with a dozen, say. We have 3, in terms of the Houston model, it's parallels in some ways, different in other ways. I've already been working with the University of Houston and Texas Southern, and also Prairie View. We've created what we called, based on the Montgomery mobilization model, we've created something we call the transformation zone. Anything within a 50-mile radius we want to touch and impact. So you have these hub churches that are willing to not only have their leadership engaged in the training that we offer, but they will then invite 3 other churches around them so that you get the 12. And each of those churches eventually will engage themselves in something that matches that church DNA. And that involves the personal development of people around their own uniqueness, as well as the way that converges within the congregation as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm drilling down.
Brilliant.
Okay,
Please do.
when I hear that, first I hear congregational DNA. Okay, there's ways to get at congregational DNA. It's one, congregational studies.
Right.
That they've done at different seminaries around the country. I know at Canada, where I did my doctorate degree, as Rollins school, Rollins Department of, they did church studies. Frank Thomas and others did it, where we actually did ethnographic studies. Of the congregation, went into congregation, participant observation, did community walks, began to talk, and then began to understand what that congregation is. So when you say, what's a congregation's DNA, what would that look like? What's a congregation's DNA? How would you know what that is?
Well, before we had Gerber's and beech nuts baby food, Mama would chew up whatever she wanted the baby to eat and put it in the baby's mouth after she had chewed it a little bit. Well, so we have to kind of chew this up to make it palatable for congregations to work with. So one of the things that we do in the Leadership Institute, what we're trying to do is to provide the pastor or the pastor's designee with just a quick orientation into leadership studies, the foundations for leadership studies. We talk about change theory. We give them an introduction to asset-based community. We've changed it from development to engagement. We talk about how do you create high-performing teams. We look at systems thinking and systems theory, and we look at family systems theory in particular. We look at the philosophy of Martin Luther King, and then every participant has to do a capstone project. That capstone project is designed to utilize the learning that has taken place in the Institute and to create a small project that addresses, that. And then there is a matrix that is dealt with. Know yourself, know God, know the community, and know the congregation. Knowing yourself, we're talking about using instruments like the Enneagram that Dr. Wood is so well versed in. Knowing God has to do, what does God have to say about justice and mercy, and how does that apply to the overall ministry of the church? Knowing your community means you don't have to do these intensive mapping of the community, but you can. We show you how to do that. But it's like taking prayer walks, talking to the folks in the community, having listening stations, and then knowing the congregation is, well, how ready is the congregation really to do this, and what are the kinds of things that needs to happen? So we suggest that the pastor would develop a 15-member team that would be the core team, and there are different trainings that we do with that team. Then we have a model that we call healing communities that Dr. Wood and I, along with Dr. Dee Dee Coleman, under the auspices of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and was funded by the Annie Casey Foundation, we created.
And we launched it here in Houston.
And we launched it here in Houston.
At St. John's.
Yes, absolutely.
About 3 or 4 years ago.
Right. And so we got this healing communities model where we train congregations around being what we call stations of hope. We encourage churches to learn how to partner together so that there's a hub church and then clusters around it. And then we we even give them some instruments to do community mapping so that they can help to foster this whole project. So that's kind of getting down to the nuts and bolts of it. Yeah.
So have you done this before? I mean, have anybody been through this training yet? Have you had
in
training?
different settings.
Yeah.
Okay.
In different settings. And what we're doing, you see, what we understand is that if you have an operation that can address some particular factor, that's good. You help the people in that limited setting, but it does not have impact. But when you bring together about 3 of these models in the same place, then you have collective impact. And
Exactly.
that's where we're moving.
That's right. And
Yeah.
I was going to mention, notice of collective impact is that you have what you call some people call a backbone organization. So that's called a quarterback.
Right.
We call it a trellis.
Yeah.
So what does your backbone organization or your trellis looks like? Who runs this thing? Who coordinates it? Who does the synergy? Who communicates between the different churches?
We're talking about 2 different cities right now when you do that.
Yeah.
But go ahead on.
Yeah, the backbone organization is different in each place. Jubilee National Collaborative is serving as the trainer and the facilitator of the whole process. But the backbone organization could in the process as we see it is a church that sort of serves as the lead church in that in that arena, whatever that arena is.
And also, in this case, as far as Houston's concerned, we have 3 churches have now indicated that they're willing to be the hub, and they'll announce at the appropriate time.
Okay. So, models that I know about is the Alameda County Care Alliance in Oakland, California, where they started out with 5 hub churches, okay, in that city, but they had one church, Allen Temple Baptist Church and the Allen Temple Foundation, that acted more or less as that operating center,
Right.
Or backbone or quarterback that operates out of it. So in Houston, will one church serve as the center for the 3, or will all 3 be
Well, as
independent of
Owen has
themselves?
said, we're going to design it based on the city.
City, okay.
And so, right now, this event we've had here now is just sort of the first phase of the discussion with the broader community here.
Okay,
And also giving them exposure to a model that is further along.
Okay.
And the way Houston is designed, I mean, this is the 3rd or 4th largest city in America, and it is very much neighborhood oriented. And so, my experience, and I don't have huge experience in Houston, but what strikes me when I come here is that it takes an hour and a half, 2 hours to get from one end of Houston to the other. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to have just one organization coordinating in a place as large and spread out as Houston.
Okay. So you're not able to name the
No,
churches
that'd
yet?
be inappropriate.
It'd be inappropriate.
They will announce them.
They will announce them, okay.
We don't take their prerogatives.
Okay. So, you said there's a model that's further along. Well, where has the model operated at that you can talk about?
It's been operating in Richmond.
In Richmond, okay.
We're right at the launch point in Lynchburg, and so we do have a little bit of track record under us.
I think it would be very interesting to share with them your work with the jail and the people on their way out and that.
Yeah, the incarceration, that was one of the major
the
topics.
back end work that people
Yeah.
come on Sunday and so forth.
Yeah, so, Dr. Wood and I have been collaborating, I don't know how many years
Long
now, on a concept that we had called reversing the jail trail.
Okay.
We had been doing some work with the Children's Defense Fund, and out of that work, Marion Wright Edelman began to talk about in some places, the cradle to prison pipeline, in some places, the school to prison pipeline. As Dr. Wood and I talked more and more about it, we concluded that the concept of a pipeline is very, very restrictive, and so we like our model of a jail trail because if you're on a trail, you can always reverse the direction that you're in on that trail. But we also recognize that the trail was complex because there is a front end to this jail trail, there is a middle part to the jail trail, and there's a back end of the jail trail. And when we applied that to actual what was actually happening with mass incarceration. The front end was all those things, the skid that lead people onto that pathway in the first place. Obviously, that means that on the front end, you're doing a lot of work with children and youth, to keep them from going in that fashion. The middle is really where people are actually incarcerated, whether in jail or prison or whatnot. There is not only work that has to be done with them, but with their families, because 90% of people that are in jail or prison at some point are going to come home. So that work required working with both the inmates and with their families. And then we have this huge reentry issue that takes place because of mass incarceration. We have something like 650,000 people being released from jails and prisons each year. So we've got folks that are coming back in the community. So how do we do this? Now, in the culture that we're talking about, in church culture, you hear people talking about prison ministries. Well, that's almost a misapplication of what is really taking place on the ground. Because when people talk about jail and prison ministry, for the most part, they're talking about going to jail, preaching, and doing Bible study. There's a whole lot more work that needs to be done. So, number one, we were first in Virginia to introduce to the prison system there video visitation for jails. We partnered with them for years, and people would come to our church. We would provide an opportunity for them to visit by way of video conferencing with their loved ones in the jail. As the technology increased to where now video conferencing is primarily done over the internet, jails and prisons became concerned about the security issues around that. So we let that go. We began most recently working directly with Henrico County Jail, which is where our church is located. My wife and I were in a community meeting, and the sheriff came up to me and said, "Dr. Cardwell, as long as I've been sheriff in Henrico County, no pastor has ever asked me could they bring inmates from the jail to their church." And I said, "Can you do that?" He said, "I'm the sheriff." When sheriffs are elected, they have a lot of power. When they're appointed, it becomes a different matter. But we have an elected sheriff. So it's a constitutional office. He can't be put out of office unless he's voted out of office or for malfeasance. So he says, I can pretty much do whatever I want to do. I get the cooperation of the courts. And so I said, well, give me a little time and we'll come up with something. So we created a program that we now call the Phoenix Initiative. We pick up men and women from Henrico County Jail each Sunday. They have to have reached the point where they are allowed to be on work release. And the idea behind that is that they have created enough trust with the jail that we don't have to have armed security in the church. So we bring them to church on Sunday morning for a worship service. After they've been with us for 4 weeks, we allow them to invite their families to come. We provide for them and their families a family meal after service, and the program initially provided training in a motherhood curriculum or a fatherhood curriculum. We've now expanded our curriculum offering. They do 18 weeks of motherhood or fatherhood training. Then they can do 18 weeks of what we call resiliency education. And after the 18 weeks of resiliency education, they can do 16 weeks in a program that's called Jobs for Life. So we got a year-long program that we have. The program has been in existence for just about 2 years. We've served 158 inmates, and only one person has returned to incarceration.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
To go back to one other point that Owen made, in my book, which was published, I sort of first cut at lessons I learned from Martin Luther King, called In Love We Trust, published in 2005, then revised in 2006 to include...
Did you bring a copy with you?
I think so. I think so. It's in the car, I believe.
Okay.
No, I have my bag here.
But we'll look at that next time.
Yeah. I just wanted to get to this point because people have been misled about the prison. When you think of the trail as something that you can't overcome, if you're trapped, see, Marion read my book in '05, and you'll discover that her discussion about cradle to prison pipeline came after that. I gave her my book myself, and she does great work. But if people think that they're trapped that way, and that they've got to go through some sort of cataclysmic something to change. Malcolm is my model for that. I've created something I call Malcolmization. I think Malcolm's transformation, he had to create his own program of transformation in a prison. He goes in a thug, a healer, thug, and comes out a healer and a leader. There's something in that. So anyway, ultimately, what you're talking about, not only about reversing the jail term, but you're talking about creating viable economy. And of course, that's something we can talk about in the next session. And
When I think about that, I also think about Mandela and
Yes.
the university they created at Robbins Island.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
so forth. They really have changed the whole nation.
Yeah,
You know, and in these jails, some of the brightest, and some of the most courageous folks,
Of course.
are in prison
Absolutely.
and wasting
And
away.
brilliant, and brilliant.
Brilliant. That's what I mean.
Yes.
And brilliant.
Yes.
You know, and so to think about creating universities or colleges or institutions of learning,
Yes.
you know, in prison, and then be able to find some useful way in which to engage their own economies outside of prison, you know, would be something that I think would be tremendous.
And
It is
something else
tremendous.
we might want to help the pastors understand. You're interested in growing your membership and people who will come in and be a vital part of what you're about. You'll get more of that, of these brothers and sisters coming out of prison and coming off the streets who have been through, they've been to hell and started back now. So they bring the prospect of transforming not only themselves, but the community itself.
Yeah, I mean, and I listened to Bishop Dixon, you know, last night. You
Yes,
know,
yes.
and one of my favorite stories. It's the story of Joshua and Caleb, you know, in the hill country.
Give me this mountain.
give me
this
this mountain. But
Give me
I
this
like the
mountain.
part about you have to go up there.
You have to go take
and
it.
carve it out
Right,
for
exactly.
yourself
That's
and take
right.
it for yourself.
Exactly.
You know, and we have this tremendous resource. You know, which are those who have been incarcerated.
Right.
You know, we said 2.2 million, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
You know,
Plus.
plus 600,000 coming out a year. You know, and then coming out to, you know, they talked about the sentence not ending. You know, problem getting a job, problem getting a place to stay, problem, you know, all these things. But what if we were beginning in while they're incarcerated to begin to train and to educate them in nation building?
Yeah.
You know, and then when they got out, they have places to which they create industries.
Right.
You know, Los Angeles, they did that after the riots with
Yeah,
Homeboard
yeah.
Industries, you know, and so forth.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Chicago
Oh, yeah.
and other
The
places.
priest there.
Yeah, priest there. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
So what if we thought, you know, about how then to be able to create this army, and about an army that create new jobs. I mean, they do. There's places in San Francisco, you know, where they've taken
Oh, sure.
ex-cons and created restaurants, and
That's right.
and then also begin to train them to build houses
That's right,
and so
that's right.
forth. What if we did that on a massive
Also
scale?
in San Francisco,
San
you have
Francisco,
the Delancey Street.
Yeah,
But
Delancey
one of the
Street,
more
exactly.
exciting ones is in New York State, Father Peter Young,
Right.
operation called Glide Path to Recovery. We've done a lot of things with Peter for now almost 25 years. They had, Peter tried to figure out what industry would be more friendly to someone with this kind of background than any. He looked at the hospital, that wouldn't be appropriate, medical, but he looked at the food industry. He trained some of the most extraordinary chefs for some of the 5-star hotels in New York. in his operation. They own hotels, restaurants. And he said you need a three-legged stool. One stool is treatment training, another place is a place to live, and then a job or training for a job. You get those three right, and of course you have a big impact on reducing the recidivism rate, but also you transform people who are taking from the tax capacity and becoming taxpayers to it. And that's what I think excites so many of the. I think it's an issue that people on the right side and the left side politically will really come behind us as we put the challenge.
I just think about the tremendous potential for changing the course of history. You know, if we could harness that kind of intellectual, physical power. You know, that's really going to waste or being recycled, you know, back in the prison and so forth.
We partner with an organization in Richmond called the Adult Alternative Program, and it was developed by a formerly incarcerated person. His name's Kenneth Williams, and he's a Class A contractor. And so Kenneth came up with the idea that if he could get the city to give him 2 houses off of the city's tax delinquent roll. We have a program there where nonprofits can buy for what it costs the city to take it off the tax delinquent roll, usually somewhere around $3,500. If he could get 2 houses, he could turn those houses over, and he would not have to ask the city for any more money. But the idea is to train returning citizens to get Class C license, because as a Class C license, they're authorized to do jobs up to $5,000. Well, if you can do 2 jobs a month, you got $120,000 income, and you don't have to worry about checking the box because now you have created your own income. That's a win-win situation rather than continuing the adversarial situation, you know, and that can happen in any city.
One of the things that we pay attention to is that Martin said we must eliminate the root causes of poverty. So you got 2 things to be concerned about. One is people got to eat today. So you got to have a way to address their immediate urgent needs, but at the same time do what Martin says: we must create the edifice where neither welfare nor charity are necessary. And that's the long-range systemic part. And you got to have as much going on around, more going on around the long-term systemic part, as well as the more urgent part.
Well, let's talk about that at our next section.
Yes. Okay.
You know, let's take it. You know, we went from, you know, the local and the personal, you know, to a model, you know, and the citywide. Now we want to look at the most long-term sustainable power. We're over time again. We want to thank you. We have this fascinating conversation, and we'll see you next time.